Hello, Eric. Welcome to the Transformational Learning Summit.
Thanks, Lorenz. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. So I do like to start these sessions with a question of what does the word transformation mean to you? What's your relationship to that concept?
Transformation. Yeah, it's actually a word that comes up a lot um, in the work of leadership and systems change. And I've always had a kind of a mixed reaction to it. So on the one hand, it sounds great, you know, caterpillar to butterfly, amazing, and it often feels disempowering to me too, because it feels so big. Oftentimes, again, thinking in the context of systems change, but even individual change. I mean, the reality, I think, is that transformation is rare in the sense of caterpillar to butterfly, or Dubai in the desert to Dubai as a mega, a big mega city. It happens, but I think that change, which transformation is kind of a part of the change, right? Change is mostly a conservative process, meaning most things don't actually change in a change process.
Hmm.
So, when we're talking about transformation, we can get excited about that, as we should, but it's also looking at what's not going to change, and then inviting people into preserving and nurturing those parts of ourselves, our teams, our organizations, because that helps them come along and not get so overpowered or
Hmm.
disempowered by the national transformation. And metaphorically, I mean, thinking about like the difference between a chimpanzee and a human being, right? DNA wise, probably less than 1%,
Hmm.
um, and yet a huge difference, right? So we
Hmm.
don't need a lot of change to be transformed, to look different, to be different. So yeah, it's kind
Hmm.
of I get lost when I think about what transformation really is when you think about it on that scale of change.
Hmm. And there's something to the subtlety of what you're saying. It is a really big word, and that's why I like to ask this question because um, everybody has a slightly different or very different definition and understanding of what it means. And there's something even in that metaphor, like caterpillar to butterfly, like the absolute death of one entity to then become another one. The humans love drama. It's like transformation. And yet I find that the most accessible, available transformation is much more in the subtle dimensions of a subtle insight or a shift in like a subtle death, like something small that dies in a way that becomes something else and actually becomes quite profound. So there is something there in like the smallness of it that is actually offers its bigness.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe just to make that a little bit more kind of real to me,
Hmm.
I've been on this, in this process of change, transformation forever, but for the last, few years in particular, things having to do with how do I integrate, for example, indigenous ways of knowing, or
Hmm.
traditional ecological knowledge, or or these forms of holding space with others, as you and I have talked about before. Um, and that felt really big and potentially transformational in terms of how it would impact my work, impact my life, because that's in the world that I operate, that kind of language, those kind of ways of knowing are not readily available or accepted. And so felt really big. And then I took a big risk to incorporate that into my work, into my, self. And now kind of on the other side, as it were, it doesn't feel like it was that big at all. I
Hmm.
feel like I'm the same person. And yet these really big ways of navigating the world and change are very much integrated into who I am. So I keep
Hmm.
asking myself, even have I transformed, or was that just all kind of a big to do about nothing? I don't think it was, but it's an odd thing to be on the other side of transformation and yet feeling pretty much the same as I am today, but with
Is,
different capabilities, different capacities, different sensibilities.
I'm going to throw a curveball at you. Um, if you look at that and you ask yourself, is there something that has died?
Yeah,
Do you have an answer?
yeah, yeah. I think I do. Let me think about it. I think what comes to mind is, I guess what's died, or what I've let go of is this fear of losing control that I think that I had, that I thought that I had over the life that I thought I was living.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, I think I mean, that was a big part of it.
mm. I would almost add for for me to kind of build on that because I love that. And then there's the element of thought because you use that word a few times there, and that's also
Mm,
I think the ongoing transformation of loosening that implicit identity with thought, and the death of whatever it is that thought it was thought. And the kind of ongoing decoupling of that in some way, allowing thought to be what it is, but not necessarily making truth out of that. I feel like that's a big part of um, like the expansion of my personal self.
I love that. I love that, Lorenz.
Mm.
Yeah. It's almost like a, again, speaking from my own experience, but it's almost like we're traumatically bonded to these habits of the mind, often
Mm.
a survival strategy. And so that loss of that bond, is, or that tie well, it can feel traumatic in its own way. But like I said, on the other side, now, not that I've completed anything, but it just
Mm.
like, actually, it wasn't that bad after all. But it was still really hard. And I still couldn't have gone through it without the letting go, the loss, the death piece. Yeah,
Mm.
but it's an everyday surrender, right? Because those
Mm.
habits of the mind come back so readily.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and it's difficult to talk about because it's such a lived process that is a little bit beyond articulation. And I think it's also very personal that hearing someone talk about it can inspire, but the lived experience of it is a little bit beyond conveyance in the sense of your relationship to it, my relationship to it. I think that's what offers its beauty.
Mm,
Hmm.
mm,
So speaking of beauty, the conversation that we set out to have today um, is at least as far as we're hoping the direction it might go is on the business of transformation. And funny anecdote for the benefit of anyone who might be watching in leading up to hitting record today. Eric shared an anecdote with me about sharing that potential subject matter with a friend of his, and the friend responded with "ick," which we both thought was pretty funny. And I will just share, as someone who myself, like being in the business of transformation, very much being dependent on what you might call sales to be able to sustain this work and reach more people. It's a subject that I think about a lot, and I think it's a really important subject for um, anybody who's doing this work to be able to also sustain themselves and earn a livelihood and understand how to also communicate about this work in a way that um, invites more people into it. So yeah, I'd love to open up this conversation with you, Eric, and also uh, get your take on the ick.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's the obvious take on the ick. Um, I think connecting to what you said a moment ago around transformation, change being a firsthand experience. In other words, someone can hear you talk about it, you can tell the story, your story, but that's not going to produce the change per se. It provides other benefits. I think part of the ick, maybe for me, is around that. It, it's the idea, it's the knowledge that any kind of true transformation will be a entirely firsthand experience of the person going through it. And the best I can do is witness, support, all the things that you do, provide tools even. But there's something about the transactional nature of business as we've come to know it, in the
Mm,
modern world, that suggests that I'm going to do it for you, do it with you, do it to you. Um, the transactional piece of that, and that's I think for me where we lose potentially this notion that it's your work to do, and any business transaction we conduct is going to be of a different quality, a different kind of experience than what you might be used to.
mm.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that, at least for me, is an important consideration is the element that I think a transformational process implicitly involves deep vulnerability. It really involves you opening yourself up in a way that might dissolve particular defenses that are often there to protect you from, people who might be taking advantage of you in some way. And so there's a lot of trust that's involved in a transformational process. And another side of that ick is um, navigating that line, because in if you're trying to sell something to someone, um, and at the same time you're offering them this path that involves a deep level of trust and vulnerability, um, that really invites a lot of mindfulness and integrity into how you approach that process and not take advantage of what transformation might the opportunity might offer you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one reason, of course, why I think the gift economy is a much better,
Mm,
kind of landscape within which to be offering the kinds of transformation services and receiving those services that we aspire to. Uh, and there's so many different ways and people that have written about gift economy. For me, the work of Charles Eisenstein has been particularly
hmm.
helpful in understanding. He wrote a book called Sacred Economics.
Yeah, I love
Uh,
that book.
if you're, yeah, I mean, I've read
Mm,
that book probably 30 times over the last 12, 15 years, whatever, because the first 10 times I didn't understand it.
mm,
And it just took repeated readings to understand the subtleties and nuances of what that means. Now, and then, so I've been experimenting with that actually, the gift pricing in my
mm,
work, and we could talk, maybe a bit about that. But that's a different domain, I think, although maybe an aspirational domain from where we are right now, which is selling, buying, and the kind of transactional economy that underpins that currently. But it helps me to at least think about what is the aspiration. Is it to perpetually sell in that kind of selling, buying economy? Or is it something we're actually taking a step toward as we transact, necessarily
mm,
so, at least?
mm,
And then how do we name that and even experiment with that in the client, coach or client service provider relationship? Because it is a gift, right? All this work. It's not, it's not to get too esoteric about it, but I
mm,
don't think that anything that you or I or any of us in the transformation business are doing is new. That doesn't mean that it's better or worse, but this has been around for a long time in different forms. Some paid for, some not paid for over the centuries. It's funny to me. People, this work of leadership development, which is the label that's often given to what I do, because I work with people in those positions. Um, yeah, I don't go back 2,000 years or even 500 years and ask yourself, so who was playing that role back then? It was probably the court jester in one form, right?
Really?
Uh,
I would think it was the local priest or something.
well, many people, but yeah, at least my
Mm,
form of leadership development is you're kind of calling the BS on people in a
mm.
way that they can hear. You're disappointing people, you're disrupting them in a way that's tolerable for them in order to shine light. It's like a stand-up comedian in a way. The good ones I find will through their craft bring you into the taboo, into the unknown, into the undiscussable, and then make it okay to laugh there. And in doing so, expand the domain of what's discussable. So, I kind of joke again, so this role, this transformation role, be it systems transformation, personal, has been around for a long time. And it just so
Mm,
happens, that I'm in a space now where it's called leadership with the economy that's wrapped around that. But it's nothing new, and that again, that gives me a lot of comfort as I think about
mm,
what this could become over time and how we can
mhm,
transact in a way that's truly representative of the values and the energy, the spirit of what we're trying to do.
mhm. I appreciate you momentarily mentioning that esoteric element, because I think it's very constructive to be aware of the nature of the world that we live in terms of, I want to be a little more specific there, in terms of the constructs that we live by, so this construct of ownership, this construct of transaction, this construct of money. These are all agreements that we have on some mass collective basis, um, and and so I think it is helpful to be aware of that without necessarily thinking that you can be outside of it, but nonetheless recognizing that that's something that bit by bit, incrementally, collectively, we can transform in one way or another. And when it comes to whatever we might refer to as wisdom or understanding, uh, I mean, I'll speak for myself and say that the vast majority of my transformation is happened to me. I can, like, the experiences that really opened me up, the experiences that really connected me to God, to the universe. I can't own them. I can take responsibility for what I've done with those experiences and how I've integrated them into my life. um but they were a gift. And so there's something there. I mean, there's so many dimensions to having this conversation in a meaningful way. um in in And so I do think it's valuable to reflect on these things, but also to be very real about
Hmm.
the economy, right? The necessity of livelihood, the recognition of the incredible value that um, this kind of wisdom or understanding can add to a person's life. That they can truly serve them and serve the world, and that has at least in the world that we live in the agreements that we have on a mass collective human basis, that has financial value
Hmm.
that you can transact around. I'd love to hear a little more about your experimentation journey with gift economics.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. And again, holding the space, which I'm sure we'll come to later on, of the practical quote unquote stuff, for
Mm.
people who are really thinking about how do I pay the bills. But
Mhm.
but to take a dive into gift economy, it was kind of I'd always been interested in it. It was kind of thrust upon me, as you were saying, in an unexpected, uninvited way, actually. And and here's the story. I was doing a big piece of work for a major tech company as I was forming my current company. And um, I had decided to use that as an opportunity to expand a network of collaborators, who could join me. And we were traveling all around the world. Every major city. It was a huge company. And I told myself that's why I was doing the work, to build community, to expand the collaborators that we had, build capacity around this work of leadership development. I told myself it wasn't about the money, or the actual work. And because it was pretty straightforward work. It was actually not that transformative. It was just straight up 2-day workshops, good stuff, but not what brings me alive. Well, fast forward about 6, 7 months later, the company that I contracted through, because it was too big of a contract for me to manage administratively, contracting wise. The company I contracted through had a cash flow issue. And it dawned on me 8 months into this, having traveled around the world, meaning paying for 25 people to travel all around the world, that I was not going to get paid. And I'd already paid them.
Mm.
So, young father, new business, and all of a sudden this massive red number on the financials, right? Saying that you can't make it anymore. And I was sitting in my room, my bedroom, um, and I heard myself say to myself, not for the first time, if I only, and I heard myself saying, I just wasted 6 months of my life,
Mhm.
and if I only got paid, it would be worth it. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, it made sense at the time. But when I
Mhm.
heard myself say that, I thought, wait a minute, is that what you're saying, Eric? And what about this original reason you said you got into this work, building community, collaborators? Now you're saying your time would not have been wasted if you just got that huge chunk of money. Now, I needed the money. It was not like I couldn't afford to not have it. So what happened, there's more to the story, but in terms of clarifying my values, I said, I'm never going to accept a piece of work again unless I would be delighted if they didn't come through and pay me at the end of it.
Delighted is a strong word.
Right. Meaning I enjoy the work so much. I so believe in
Mm,
people and the
mm,
experience of my growth that, yeah, of course you want to be compensated. But
mm,
if I didn't, I would be fine with that.
mm,
So that, I don't always live up to that bar, but it's certainly a lens that I look at all the work
mm,
nowadays. And that
mm,
translated then, to your question, into the gift economy, where I would say, and I say to people now, who knows how valuable this is? It's a leap of faith for you to, I can give you a client testimonial, right? But you won't know until you go through it. I won't know until I go through it. So rather than deciding the value now, let's wait until we're done. And then you choose a number that represents your feeling of, having received something valuable or your desire to give forward. Because, my guess, Lorenz, is that the gift you talked about that you received in those transformative moments, the natural response to that gift is to want to give forward of yourself,
mm,
of your talents, of your passions. So give that forward instead if it's not giving money for the services, right? And that's a real clarifying moment for you because when they don't pay and you say, oh gosh, but if there's any element of manipulation, if there's any hint of insincerity, it doesn't work. Work is not the
mm,
right word. You know what I'm saying? Like,
mhm,
and that's the clarifying process for me of gift
mhm,
economics. It helps you, kind of be very clear about what you're about, who you're about, and why.
mm,
Sometimes, with a hard lesson financially attached to it, but more
mhm,
often than not, I would say people actually come through in a way that's beyond the generosity you can imagine, not
mhm,
just financially, but otherwise. And that's the beauty of this. So I do believe that gift economy is very real and it can be made real. But for those, including myself now and even back then, who are just taking the first steps into it, you have to experiment with it. Try
mhm,
it with one client, one person, one project, see how it goes. And it's not a good, bad thing. It's just a readiness question for you
mhm,
and for them. Because many people, I have a guy, just one short anecdote, very wealthy individual, billionaire, real estate mogul, who, when he received this gift offer from me, um, got so angry that I swear he was going to throw coffee in my face at the cafe. It was such an affront to his sense of value that that was his reaction, right? And so it really it really activates things when you kind of lean into it.
Did it work out with him?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, we continued. They just said, what they said as well, our finance and legal department doesn't know how to handle that, so we're just going to pay you. Which is literally the structural, the kind of structural, as
Right,
you were saying, the
right.
narrative that we're embedded in. It's just a narrative,
Mhm,
but it feels so real and structural for
right,
those who,
right. So it's interesting as I was wondering, because I know I've seen in your public facing workshops, the ones that aren't, as far as I understand, like directed specifically within the context of an organization or a client. I've seen you work with this model. I did not realize that you also worked with it as far as like big client projects. So how does that work?
yeah, that's the question, right? The short answer is sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Some people say great, but it's just a way for them to save money. Some people, say great and they really take it in. Others don't know what to do with it, like the example I just gave. Um, I think what's really important is readiness again. This guy was not ready. And probably I wasn't ready too. Hence, my delivery of that probably evoked some of that response that he gave me. Not the coffee, thankfully, but the other part. Um, so I am choiceful about who and how I offer it, not with the idea in mind of I'm only going to offer it to people who will pay, because that's not a sincere offer. But is this person really, honestly, to the point around of transformation, is this person at a point in their career, in their understanding of themselves, uh, and their expression of their purpose? Is this going to be a helpful way to engage with them? And um, often that conversation around money results in at least it begins the conversation of transformation that you would hope for because money is a proxy, it's kind of a focal lens for values and identity and ego and all that stuff that's, I think very much
Mhm,
a part of the transformative process. So in your
mhm,
question, how does it go? I think at that level goes really well because people you begin the work right away before you even contracted. And then financially, yeah, it depends on, the place and, and it's not about being pure about it. I
mhm.
definitely don't offer it times when I probably could. So,
And
yeah.
just on a technical level, in terms of like the mechanics of it. I think with the workshop model that I saw, I'm not 100% sure about this, but it was something where like pay now and then get money back or something. Like what are the mechanics of
Yeah.
how you work? And I'd love to hear, I'm sure you've experimented with this in different like particular mechanics and models of it. Like can you cover some of the things you've actually tried just
Yeah.
in terms of like the actual implementation?
Very happy to share. And again, this is just one version of it. There's many. Yeah, that was interesting. So you mentioned, so we do ask for a deposit before these public workshops.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, we did not. It was purely gift pricing up front. And what I learned very quickly was that, again, in the current kind of economic paradigm, when you don't, when people don't put a financial outlay up front, they don't take it
Mm-hmm.
seriously.
Right.
And so, whereas before gift pricing was offered, people never canceled coming to a workshop. And maybe
Mm.
if it was like a bad weather or sickness.
Right.
Once I started offering gift pricing, all of a sudden I was getting 40% cancellations at the last minute, which is a big problem when you're trying to create the space, for people to go through a
Mm-hmm.
transformative process. So what we landed on after some experimentation is the deposit. And it's, the deposit, I think roughly 1/3 to 1/6 of the overall fee that it would be if it were not gift pricing. But we make it very clear from the get-go, from the very first kind of email inquiry, that the deposit's fully refundable, that we're requiring it for the explicit reason of people not canceling at the last minute, and uh, that there's absolutely no expectation attached to payment. No guilt. There's nothing of that sort. And often, when people do ask for that deposit back, which happens maybe 10% of the time, for good reasons, financial or otherwise, we pay the PayPal fee or whatever the fee is, of
Mm-hmm.
$25. So it actually costs us something in addition to all the labor and materials and everything else that goes into it. Because we send a package, which is, in some cases, hundreds of dollars to send it internationally. So, so that's how we've learned the deposit really helps. It's a clarifying process for the person as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And have you experimented with any other versions of gift economies? Like I love the way that Charles does it, which was really of all the models I've encountered so far, one of my favorite, which is for his courses on his website. When you sign up, they're all kind of a pay what you can model, but he takes you through quite a bit of reading and reflection to make you aware of the value that you're receiving, to make you reflect on your own capability of paying. And so it's not just like I've seen some implementations of gift economics where it's just like, here's a line for you to input how much you can pay. So there's not a lot
Right.
of invitation to really deep consideration. And what
Mhm.
I appreciated about the way that Charles implements it on his website is that it really takes you into deep consideration for what you're stepping into, while also offering you the option in the end to really pay what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I've actually taken his model and adapted that too. It's the basis for what I do as well. Yeah. It,
Mm-hmm.
it begins from the moment people inquire. So, the very first inquiry for a piece of work or a workshop begins to seed this idea of gift economics, and only in a small dosage, because again, for many people, it's confusing. It's a turnoff. It seems like there's a hook. What's the hook here? It raises
Mm-hmm.
suspicions. So you have to be, I think, very subtle about it. And then with each successive touch point, be it email or registration pages or the prep work and even in session, you kind of layer the next level because it's an educational process, right? We're trying to unlearn a system right now that wants us to be transactional. And each stage, I think, helps people um, lower their guard, and that suspicion. And that comes with a tremendous responsibility, of course, on our part, on my part, to deliver on that spirit of the gift economy. Because if I come across at all as, yeah, there is a hook, or I really wish you've now done more damage than good. And so, yeah, so there's a lot, and there's languaging on the website and in the materials and all that, which I've tweaked over time, but a lot of it does draw on Charles's model.
Mm-hmm. And if you're working, so is this gift model something you offer universally to every client or selectively to some potential clients? Like when
I
you're
wish,
dealing with a project.
yeah, I wish there was actually one year where it was offered to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was like I think the second year I've been doing this now for about 8 years, I think. Um, so No, the answer is no, not to everyone. It is to people who I feel are ready to engage in this process. Again, not ready to pay, but ready to engage in this process of inquiry. Um, Even in the contract, if we have a statement of work, there's a clause in there that says that if the client organization chooses not to pay or pay less than the market value, and I can talk about market value and how you kind of signal that too,
Mhm.
then the ask is that the person, the actual liaison within the client organization, your touch point, your contact person, that person is is invited to give forward the difference between what is paid and what the market value is, to give forward that difference in terms of their own value. It could be financial, it could be to us, it
Mm.
could be to somebody else, it could be their own gifts, their own talents, their own passions,
Mm.
you know, however, whenever, and to whomever they want. They don't need to let us know. But we do make it
Mm.
about the individual so that
Interesting.
responsibility is not diffuse,
Mm.
you know?
Mm. So
Yeah,
how,
but
give me an example of how big a job or client, however way you might convey that, that you've actually done this approach with.
I have to think about that. I think about that. Big, I mean, big.
Maybe in the
Yeah,
context also of what you're saying, market value. I'm kind of curious how you approach that.
yeah. It depends on yeah, it depends on the nature of the service or the
Hmm.
work. But I mean, there's in terms of just absolute numbers, there have been contracts north of six figures
Mm.
uh, where this offer was made.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
So that's I mean, that's a big,
it's a
well, big
lot. Yeah,
risk for you in
it's
terms of the
huge. Yeah,
resources required to deliver the job.
huge. Which is why you have to be super clear that it's worth it before you go in, right? And it's not worth it to go in and saying, "I hope I get paid."
Right.
That's not a good risk.
Mm.
The risk is even if I don't, this would have been so worth it. I would have done this freely.
Hmm.
And coming from that place, then um, it really opens up, within me at least, that spirit of the gift where I give more than I give differently and I give better, than what I can give if I know there's just a financial piece to that, which there seldom is, because the work we do is, people who are ready for change. There's another anecdote I'll share with you. There was and I'm not going to name names here because it'll be easily identifiable, but there was a piece of work that I got into um, in the spirit of the gift. It was a 2-year project, and actually 3 years. We're now in year three. And after the first year of doing it, it was someone who really demanded a lot of attention, needed a lot of attention, and I enjoyed giving the attention and support too. But it was a lot of time, to your point around risk, right?
Hmm.
And um, at the end of the year, I was wondering, what's going to come through. Now, already that's a signal that I was maybe not in for the reasons I thought I fully was. And what came through was a charitable gift from that person to another organization. I was like, okay, all right, well, that's what this is about. And then I had this choice of do I re-up? Do I do this another year with them? And I kind of went deeper into why am I really doing? Because I knew there was something there I was doing this work for that was
Hmm.
worth doing regardless. And I chose to re-up for another year. Um, and it was a great year. It was like it really I was in it now for the purer reasons than what I thought I
Hmm.
was earlier on. And funny enough, in a moment of need, this person voluntarily offered to subsidize a big retreat that I was hosting, and uh, and it didn't pay for my time. It paid actually for other people who couldn't afford to come. But that was a gift, the best gift I could have received to have these
Hmm.
people present in this retreat. And it came out of nowhere, and I was like, wow, okay, yeah, there it is. That's that spirit, the cycle of the gift. Really, yeah, it was really, really beautiful. And
Hmm.
that money meant much more to me and to the 26 people involved in that retreat than, what a transactional exchange
Hmm.
would have felt like. Yeah. So
Hmm.
same person, same client, same people, and yet very different intentionality that maybe
Hmm.
maybe had something to do with a different result.
I really appreciate like the complexity and the courage of what you're outlining. It also reminds me of one of my all-time favorite parables, the parable of the long spoons. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't think I've heard that, no.
Oh, this is the best story ever. So it's like this guy is getting a tour of heaven and hell. And so he's down in hell, and there's this enormous cauldron with these emaciated people standing around it with these really long, like 8-foot spoons. and they're all trying to feed themselves and they can't because the spoons are so long and they're starving and they're just like so miserable. And it's like, okay. And then God takes him to heaven, and it's the same enormous cauldron. And all these people are standing around with these 8-foot spoons, and they're all laughing and having the best time ever because they're using the spoons to feed each other. The guy's like, what's going on here? And so God is like, well, in heaven, they're all trying to feed themselves. And
Yeah.
here they're all feeding each other, and they've discovered the joy of that, of the gift. And to me, that really I really love that story, but because most of all, it captures this essence that um, that a gift is so much more than just a gift.
Hmm.
You know, that when you deliver a piece of work, and there's this element of gift in whatever direction, whether you're actually gifting the work and then in return you get another gift. Um, that is that is the joy of life. It creates this other completely other dimension to the experience that I think is so enlivening. And yet we're so
Yeah.
far from it in our transactional world.
And it's, I think it can be born of practicality too. There's a really, there's a story that's kind of, well known in the areas that I work. And actually, I mentioned this to a guy named Nipun Mehta, who I think you've talked
Mm-hmm.
to recently, or you will soon, and he really got a kick out of this. But it's when the Western anthropologists first arrived on the continent in Africa, on the eastern in East Africa, um, there's a story that's told of them being perplexed that there was no food storage. There was food not being stored. There was no place to store the food, and so they had asked the question of the people in these villages. So, I noticed you don't have any food around. How do you, where do you keep your food? Because you could have famine, you could have anything could happen. And the response was, I store my food in the belly of my brother.
So let's say more. What does that mean exactly?
Well, what it means to me, it's the idea of gift. I'm going to feed my brother, my sister. I'm going to
Mm,
use that long spoon to feed another person
mm, mm,
because that's the safest place to store for me to have the security that I'll be fed when I'm in need.
mm,
Yeah. And
mm,
if there's famine or whatever it may be, we don't need to
mm,
store our food. Again, this is kind of a romanticized story, but it's the idea that,
mm,
I'm taking care of you, you're taking care of me. Um, and that is in a way its own form of gift, but it's born of practicality too, you know.
mm,
And
mm.
so yeah, that's it. I love that.
It creates a completely different quality of being around the whole experience. I think that's, it is tricky. I find in practice, and we've also experimented with different versions of it where we landed. So, for me, when we're offering anything, whether it's our platform or a course, um, if I feel like the person approaching me who may not be able to afford it is really going to make use of it, and it's really going to make a difference in their lives and possibly in the people that they're working with, I'm 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 joyed. It gives me great deep satisfaction to be a part of that. What I don't like is when somebody approaches me with an expectation, like, hey, I don't have any money, let me take your course. I get this vibe of like almost like expectancy.
Mhm.
And then uh they don't participate much, or they just don't seem to do much with it. And that really rubs me the wrong way.
Mhm.
So the way that we approach it now is we're very liberal with our scholarships. But we do have an application where we kind of like share a little bit about, and I'm curious to ask you in a moment about how you signal market value. But we share a little bit about the effort that goes into the program. We ask them a little bit about their background, why they want to join, what they like hope the program will offer them, and what they might be able to contribute, either financially or beyond financially. And then for me, really, it's an intuitive process. Like I'm very sensitive to the language and wording of how people communicate things, and I'll just like kind of sit with like how do I feel with the way this communication is landing with me, and use that, because there's, I think, the other dimension that we're not really talking about here, and it is a really interesting dimension when you're offering a group experience, is that part of the value for the participants is each individual participant, right? So like who is in the space makes a difference for everyone else, and that's a then you're kind of responsible, you know. Like I, at least from this is the one of the lessons I've learned from running group experiences. Like I'm also responsible for the people that show up, and one of the filters, whether we like it or not, is financial in terms of like, you know, I think they have these masterminds where people pay tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to participate, and that becomes the like the filter for that person, for people, you know, we're all in a room with a bunch of people who could afford to pay $100,000 to be here, then there somehow that creates like the conditions for sharing value. So I find that I've seen that phenomenon be true at the lower end of an experience that's like $300 versus $1,000 versus, you know, more than that. The amount of money that a person can afford to pay for an experience does tend to reflect their kind of, you know, and I'm not talking in absolutes here, but it does tend to reflect their certain professional aptitude, like how successfully they've sold themselves and been able to generate money to be able to pay for something. That
Mm,
then is an indicator of uh, what, you know, what their presence in the space might offer to other participants. And so I always really consider now intuitively, like if a person is coming in and they're not paying for something, are they still going to be like part of like a meaningful value equation there, both in terms of like whether or not they're going to do something with this, whether they take it for granted or have this sense of expectation, or whether they're really sincere. And if they're really sincere, and you know, again, I'm trying to communicate that it's, you know, it's not always like a perfect formula for how you determine that sincerity. But for me, if if someone is really sincere and it's really adding value to them in their lives, and then they're also contributing value through their presence, I don't care about them.
mhm. Yeah, 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 yeah. I thought for a minute you were going to also talk about people who can afford to pay and choose not
Who,
to. It's a whole different group, but yeah,
who can, yeah, I haven't had that
yeah,
experience. So I mean, I guess like, so has that been, have you had a lot of experience with, maybe with one-on-one clients, you've had that experience? Because I'm mostly in the context of talking about people signing up for like a public facing
right,
training
right.
program, but um say more.
Well, no, just it's because it's there's different ways to engage with people, you know, in these different kind of groups that you're talking about. Those who can but
Mm,
don't, those who can but don't want to, those who cannot but do.
mm, mm.
It's another interesting category.
But those who
Uh,
cannot but do, and that's always really touching to me. The people who
right.
I know who are stretched, but they still like put up the money, that's a special kind of person in my heart.
There was a woman that attended one of my workshops, I think 5 years ago now, who couldn't pay. Was it, I think the $500 at the time or whatever it was. She said, but someday I'll be able to. And 3 years later, wrote me out of the blue saying, I want
Mm,
to pay now.
wow. Yeah.
You know, talk about transformation and what did whatever happened, the alchemy, you know, of those interactions and that person's relationship to money and wanting to give that forward and give it back. I mean, just so beautiful.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I think I mean, so this question of how do you, you know, on the one hand, how do you select who to offer it to, you know, and that kind of that process that you go through. Um, you know, who gets to do the selecting is kind of another question too, which, you know, has its own dimensions. But I think for me, the way I think about it is readiness. How do we get people ready to receive even the offer? Um,
mm,
so you know, so the way I kind of see it is, well, if we're talking about human potential, human transformation, you know, deep, important work, um, you know, either it should be free because who do we have? What do we have the right to charge for that? You know, and you know, a mother's love for their child. You're gonna charge for that?
just wait.
Yeah, yeah. It's
They'll
just
find a way.
right. It'll be commodified eventually. I mean, Facebook on it. Seriously, right? But you know, but that's obscene. But on the other
Mm,
hand, that kind of transformation is truly invaluable in the sense that you should charge an infinite amount of money for it. So we're either charging way too little or way too much for these transformative learning experiences. So how do we decide? You know,
mm,
is it market value? Is it your ability, or is it something different? And so that for me, the invitation is always to make it very personal and say, you know, what I'm giving forward is is my gift. Yeah, I may not use that language, but it's something that I've received through people I've learned from, parents, everything that I want to give forward. And yeah, I put a lot of hard work into it, and that, as we all do. Um, so the invitation is for you to to consider, what is your gift? What are you here for? What is your purpose? And to come into relationship with that so you can give that forward. And you may want to give that forward as a financial contribution to me or to somebody else. But the important question is, why are you here? So again, this is part and parcel of the transformation conversation. Why
Mm,
are you here? What is your work right now? What's yours to do? And how in a microcosm does this exchange around money actually, you know, make that more possible for you or clarify
mm,
it for you? Even
mm,
if you don't want to do it, at least you know that's a choice, not something you're just kind of, blind to. So yeah, that's it for me. Another way to kind of filter is not the right word, but another way to kind of help people get ready to enter the space and understand what has been imbued in it from my part as
mm,
well as potentially from theirs.
mm, mm. You talked
Yeah.
about signaling market value. Like, can you share a little more about how specifically you might signal the market value of
Yeah.
something that you're offering?
Another thing that came out of experimentation, I was kind of a purist in the beginning. I didn't want to give any kind of market value. I didn't want
Mm,
to, lead the witness, as it were. Um, and very quickly learned that, again, the way we've been trained to navigate the world, to orient ourselves to value, is through this, through dollar amounts or whatever the currency may be. And so oftentimes people needed a number just to understand what
right.
domain they're in, right? And so, and having done this work now for over 20 some odd years, I'm very clear what the market value is at, different levels: corporate, individual, nonprofit, for-profit, government, et cetera, international, domestic. So that I know those numbers, they evolve, but I know those numbers. So I just say that to people. Yeah, here's the market value. And but then again, make it very clear, this is not an expectation or a pressure or a guilt. It's just, this is what it, what's there. And then you can use that if you'd like to see what the difference will be between what you pay and what you would have paid, plus or minus, but for that matter. And if it's minus, then how do you give forth that extra $5,000? If you
Mm,
want to put a number to it in terms of your own voice and gifts and passions. So I'm very upfront with the market value. Yeah.
mm, mm. I think it's important to also, I just want to acknowledge there's so many ways to approach this in the context of selling transformation. One of the organizations that I've really admired, and it kind of, I mean, people have different opinions about this organization, but I certainly appreciate the value that they've offered to my life, which is Landmark. And they, have you taken any Landmark programs?
I've been involved a little bit with them, and yeah, Lynn Twist a little bit recently too. I mean, she's since well past that, I think, but yeah, yeah.
Okay,
She
so
was
they
involved.
they have
They came out of the Est work, right? Early on.
yeah, Est
Yeah.
exactly. Werner Erhard, who's
Yeah.
like
And the
also
Hunger
been a big
Project and all.
teacher
Yeah.
for me. And well, so they have a whole model. I mean, so much of their transformation revolves around enrolling people to like enroll other people. But other than the enrollment factor, which I want to kind of like, that could be a whole conversation in its own right. What I appreciate about Landmark, um, their prices are non-negotiable. The prices are not high for what they offer. Like other transformational experience providers like Tony Robbins, there's sky's the limit on what they charge. And part of what they invite you into is like the commitment. If something, they kind of they lead you to believe that something will make a big difference in your life. And in my experience, it does. Like I certainly have benefited hugely from what they shared with me. And at the time when I was invited to participate, it was like, I don't know, like 600-800 bucks. It was a lot of money for me.
Mhm.
And it was just like, listen, like you can make it work. If this is
Mhm.
important to you, you can make it work. And I think there's also a truth to that. Like you have to have the conviction to understand
Mhm.
what you're offering and why you're offering. But up to a certain amount of money, a person can make it work. And there's something, in this context of transformation, and you kind of pointed this earlier, the relationship we have with money is already in itself a domain that's ripe for transformation for many people, right? And stepping into like a financially challenging situation and navigating it through it and making it work because it's important to you can in itself be a form of transformation. So I just think on the part of the person selling something, there's so many dimensions to consider, from your own relationship to money and value and selling something and the discomfort of that, to the person who's showing up, to just the clarity around like the full landscape of what you're offering, and really having the kind of the conviction, insight, and integrity to navigate that landscape with awareness and intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think about, there's different levels of conversation around this kind of model. So like landmark, big organization, um, you know, and apparently works well as a business model, right? So that's great. I wonder though, like at the individual level, so if you're a salesperson or someone who's delivering the sessions, again, for me, the gift of the gift pricing model, again, and I don't want to overplay it. Like, we don't do it all the
Mm,
time, and it's not perfect, and I want to get better, but is the clarifying process that I go through, you
mm.
know. So I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to have
About
a
why you're doing it.
yeah. So if you
Mm,
had a massive
mm,
organization and it works and it hits the numbers and you know how to balance and project your budgets and pay people, and that's really valuable, right? It's great. I'm glad you can operate. They can operate in that way. But do you lose that personal, transformative opportunity in the relationship that builds with the client? Because I do think that
mm,
client relationship, at least for the work that I do, and I think many who are listening to this as well, it's really about that interaction, that relationship. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting that I not really thought about what that looks like at those, kind of organizational levels,
mm, mm.
for
I don't
business
think, I
model.
mean, I just want to clarify what I shared. I don't necessarily think that that has to be something at at a large scale level like that. I think
Mm,
I think I think if you're selling a program, whether you're an individual that's selling training programs or consulting a business or, whatever, I just think there's a lot of dimensions to um, the money question that are important to be clear on and that are rich in transformative potential in and of themselves. What
right.
is my relationship to money and sales? And it really is, I think the heart of your question though is actually quite central there is, why am I doing this? Because even though you're charging for it, you can still be very clear about why you're doing it. It's just that when you're not charging for it, I think maybe it really amplifies that clarity in a particular way. But I still think that there is something really rich there around the clarity for what the money means to you, what the money means to the participant,
Right.
and like that whole territory is um, there's a lot there.
Yeah. It really is.
And
I mean, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
no, I mean, I think this, I was going to kind of navigate our conversation to this next, so I'll throw this into, but selling. So kind of like we spent a lot of time talking about
Yeah.
the gift aspect, and I feel like the other side of whether you're offering it as a gift or whether you're charging money is the very action of sales, of selling, how you communicate about an offering, whether it's to a public offering or to client. And I'd love to step on that for a moment with you and just kind of hear your reflections on how you think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me share on that. I wanted to maybe just a
Yeah,
coda on the last one.
yeah, yeah.
I believe at times that maybe for my work, my business, that the gift pricing ethos and the mechanisms of that might even be the more impactful thing than the actual leadership and transformation itself.
Mm,
I don't know, but because it is so countercultural. It's, as you were saying, it's
mm,
so
mm,
ripe a domain for change that I wonder, in 100 years, if people remember that more than they'll remember anything else.
mm,
And
mm,
in a way, kind of, just as a mental exercise, what if we were in the business actually of transforming the economic mindset,
mm,
and transformation work, leadership development work is just the vehicle we use to do that. It's
mm,
not the only one, but it's kind of flips things on its head. Say, what is the real business here? What's the real work? And money,
mm.
again, is very ripe, as you said. But
So certainly, and just I'm going to touch on that a moment because I think I would really be remiss if I didn't mention Burning Man. And for me,
mm,
as long time, 14 years, um, the way I feel in that environment, which is very much a gift economy and a space where you have 70,000 people just coming to create
yeah,
experience for each other. And this broad spectrum of what gift might mean. Gift might mean a grilled cheese sandwich in the middle of the desert, or it might mean a piece of art, or it might be in a camp where you host people, or it might just be the gift of your presence. That for me as a personal philosophical territory is the world that I want to live in. So I really appreciate what you're sharing here as
mm,
that, that one way we can live into that world is around how we approach the economics of the work that we do, like the way that you're showing by example.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not so foreign to many parts of this world. Actually, they still live in that, with at least the memory of that kind of
Mm.
way of operating. But yeah, I mean, I think selling. Yeah, this is where the ick thing maybe becomes more relevant. And it's always icky to talk about money and dollar amounts in this kind of conversation, but maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe we're trying to, maybe this conversation is part of you know what's the word? I don't know, demystifying, normalizing, making it less taboo. But selling, yeah, it's a real thing. Yeah, I do think it is mostly all about relationship, not about the selling, kind of back to the theme of this conversation. And oftentimes the problem isn't even selling. It's the problem is when you want them to buy it when you want them to buy it. If someone's going to pay you in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, well, that's not going to help me today. So it's really almost even a timing question, which gets back to this notion of I store my food in the belly of my brother. But when you do have to, when you do have to sell, I think for me, there's I guess three dimensions, three things that are at play in those conversations. Um, and that selling conversation, by the way, I would say is one of the most important interventions you can make, I think, when it comes to the change process, to the transformation process. There's a guy named Peter Block who wrote a book called Flawless Consulting. It's a bit old now. I read it during my master's degree studies, but he talks about contracting being the highest leverage point in a client consulting relationship, because that's when all the stuff comes to the fore: expectation, values, needs, insecurities. It's often all bundled into this moment of when we're deciding what we're going to do together and how much that's going to cost.
Mm.
Um, so I think of these kind of contracting conversations as I think about them, not the literal contract per se, but the expectation setting around what we're going to do together contract. Um, Kind of three pieces. One is the motivation on the part of the person that I'm working with. Do they really want to change? You know, um, Many people say they do, but they're actually not quite ready, or they want to be ready, but they're not ready yet. And so I think a big part of the selling of transformational work is doing what I would call the adaptive work, using this kind of language of adaptive leadership, which I work with. But the adaptive work is around motivation. It's about helping people see the gap between where they are and where they want to be. It's about helping
Mm.
them understand the kind of stakeholder landscape, be it family members, friends, colleagues, partners, the people who are kind of holding them in place. Because the reality is all of us are perfectly aligned to be who we are. There's nothing actually broken about anyone or any system. There's no such thing as a broken system. Every system, every person is perfectly aligned to be as they are. I'm the weight that I am because of what I eat and who does the cooking and how much money we spend on shopping and all these factors, right? It's not an accident. So if you're going to help people navigate the gap between where they are, where they want to be, that transformation process, it's often about the people around them. And are they thinking about that? So that stakeholder analysis part of it, understanding adaptive work, is a big part of helping people tap into the real motivation for doing this work. Because it's often not just about me wanting to be better from an inside out point of view, but it's often about the outside in piece. The world needs me to be better,
Mm.
family, work, etc. And that kind of motivation, when it's outside in as well as inside out, I think it provides a much firmer grounding from a selling perspective.
Mm.
So you can do that in the first two
So
conversations. It doesn't mean
is
that you
that
give away
that's a
all your stuff.
conversation? That's a conversation you're talking about where you might surface these dynamics for a person to become more aware of them.
Right, right. And then
Mm.
and that there's an inherent kind of, motivation that gets developed through that. And you've already now developed a relationship, the holding environment within which to do that transformative work. So
Mhm.
motivation is a big piece of it. Ability is the second piece of it. Does the person have the skill sets, the tools to change? Now it depends on what kind of change we're talking about. And this is very technical, again, in that language of adaptive and technical. And it's probably the services that they're there to buy from you, whatever it may be. So, helping people understand very clearly what the skills, tools, services are, how they fit that need. Very obvious thing to do in order to sell. And then the third part I think is actually the most fascinating, is what's called like a trigger moment. Trigger not in the sense of I've been triggered emotionally, but trigger in the sense of something has just happened. And oh yeah, this is the situation where I want to be transformed. This is the kind of situation that requires me to be different. So maybe I'm going off the handle, in an argument with somebody. Oh, right, I've been trying to work on that. Or maybe I'm, at work, and I am, you know, shying away from taking a big risk, entrepreneurially or otherwise, or in a courageous conversation. Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to work on. That's the transformation I was looking for. So helping people see these moments, these trigger moments, where the transformation they want can actually be applied, is really important, because I have a harder time building general capacity for transformation. For me, it's always about, so what is the need? You know, what's the use case? Where are you going to actually apply this? Where are you going to be different?
Mm,
And that conversation makes it very real, but also again, it enhances, or it makes more visible the value of what they're preparing to receive and experience
mm,
together. So the idea is that if you're going to get, kind of a solid foundation for transformative work in that contracting stage, is looking at motivation, ability, and these trigger moments, and then be in a relationship with that, around those things over time, because they will shift and evolve. So that's how I begin to think about, you know, pricing, but also when do you charge? Because sometimes the trigger moments, when there's a real need, there's gonna be a premium around that than a general. Well, I want to be better, so I'm gonna do this, and maybe it'll be useful for me in 3 years. So yeah, I'm not sure how clear that is, but that's
mm, mm.
trying to verbalize kind of some of my mental process as I think about value exchange and value, communicating value.
So this would be in the context of like a project work, like consulting on a project, or because I think it's important also just to clarify maybe the different contexts of what we might talk about. Like one might be a project with a small to mid or large size organization. One might be one-on-one coaching work of some kind, and one might be like a public facing training program, and each of those are slightly, I would imagine, are slightly different um, sales approaches. They might have the same essential attributes to them in terms of like the realization that or the awareness that is invited into a relationship, but certainly also on the like larger organizational side, they also have to deal with multiple stakeholders that I imagine, that kind of like multiple decision makers, that I imagine also adds an interesting element to the element to what you just talked about. So I wonder if you can like maybe clarify a little bit about like the specific context, and how you, like, maybe an example of how you might work with a conversational
Yeah.
approach like that.
Sure, yeah, and it applies at all levels. It is very different. So, for example, at a individual coaching level, I generally would not do kind of general coaching. It's always, so what are you trying to achieve? What's the problem you're trying to solve, or what's the gap you're trying to narrow? And that's a device also for making it real and tangible. Again, looking at it outside in instead of just inside out. It's not about who do I want to be when I grow up. It's about what's needed of me in this moment, and then who do I become in service to that. It's both, actually. So it does apply at the individual level, and then at an organizational level, similarly, people often say, "Well, we want leadership development, or we want culture change, or whatever the kind of flavor of the month is." And okay, great, we can do leadership development, but why? Like, sure, but what are you trying to lead? What are you trying to change? What's the work here, really? Because leadership development is just a tool into that, and people often don't think about that. Oh, we just want leadership. Isn't leadership good? We need more leaders. Well,
Mm,
maybe, maybe not. And so, again, trying to make those trigger moments is what I'm speaking to here. So,
mm.
what's a specific use case situation?
In some ways is another word for that, like what's the pain?
What's the pain point? Yeah, or
Mm,
I like the metaphor, what's the universe in the grain of sand? Um,
mm,
it's something really, really small. It could be a courageous conversation I need to have with my partner at an
mm,
individual level,
mm,
or it
mm,
could be,
mm,
a new technology we're trying to integrate into the organization. Okay, there's your grain of sand. Let's focus on that. But within that grain of sand is going to be everything we need to learn, because
mm,
we bring all of our, every value, every loyalty, every loss that we have at risk, that we're afraid of, giving up. Every experience we've had is happening at every moment at some level,
mm,
micro or
mm,
macro. And so if we can choose the right grain of sand, we can surface all that and work on that at the systems level while tackling a specific problem.
mm,
So again, my point here from a sales perspective is that seems to be more valuable, than general leadership development.
mm,
And so I think that's part of the skill set. And frankly, it takes a while. Even this work that I do around adaptive leadership, when that first came out of the Kennedy Scope at Harvard with the two faculty there, we kind of joke now in hindsight, but it was like, well, adaptive leadership's great. That's why people should buy it.
right.
And it took a long time, 10 years, to figure out, okay, great for what, in what context, for whom, and how, and really bringing it out of Harvard into the real world. And so that idea of kind of transforming it into a business use case of sorts, I guess, is what I'm talking about at some
Mm,
level.
mm.
But it really has been specificity, which is the work in many ways, right?
By the way,
That
just quick check in here. How you doing for time? Because I know we kind of had it marked up until 2 minutes from now, but I want to make sure you're okay to go over if
so
we do
let's
go
go.
over a
Let's go
little
a
bit
bit
more.
longer. I probably should transition at some point soon, but yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool, cool. I think what you're sharing for what lands for me is certainly in the way that we approach sales and something that I've um, learned just through the experience of selling. I always think it's like the universe's great cosmic joke that my name is Mr. Sell. I mean, literally, it's like I am Mr. Sell, but yet I've never really considered myself like the best salesperson. But certainly, what I've learned the hard way, and try to remind myself of all the time is about context. Is that when you're communicating to someone about an offering, is very important to clarify that context, through questions, through surfacing what it is for them that makes whatever you're offering relevant. Because without that context, if you're just, if like this is a mistake that I still make this once in a while. Somebody will be like, "Oh, I want a demo of the Sutra platform," and for whatever reason, I'll get excited. I'll get ahead of myself, and I'll start showing them how cool the platform is. And I just feel it as soon as I do that. I feel how whatever I'm doing is landing in emptiness because I haven't established the context of
Mhm.
relevancy to the specific features and functions that I'm demoing. And without that, it's just something that's like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." So it's just for me, that's a lesson I keep coming back to. If you're when you're communicating about anything in the context of a sales conversation, it's so important to speak into the relevancy, to really establish that, as however you can, in the context of what you're offering.
Yeah, yeah, so true. I mean, yeah, and I've learned that lesson way too many times myself. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, platform for what? Leadership for what? Yoga for what? Coaching
Mm,
for what? That's a fun conversation. Particularly
mm,
people already have this preconceived notion of what a platform is, or what some kind of embodiment practice is. So I think we can't not ask that question at some point. Why not ask it up front? And then the value exchange, of course, becomes much clearer.
mm, mm.
Yeah.
Um, how about just languaging? Like, how do you think about, say, if you're putting language to something on your website, or you're putting together a training program that you're offering to the general public? Is there anything that you think about when you're putting together the language of something that is intended to sell?
Not a whole lot, other than the gift pricing notion.
Mm,
Um, I guess I try to, and maybe this is one of my penchants, which I need to work on, but I try not to do what others are doing, you know?
mm,
So like, for example, the language of pro bono often gets used a lot.
mm,
And it's so played out. It kind of can mean anything to anyone, and often doesn't mean something really good. It means free. So I'm really careful to avoid. I guess what I would say is I'm careful to avoid anything being free. I don't think free
mm.
is the right.
That's a
That
really
doesn't.
good distinction to be made, though, between gift and free, because it's easy to blur that.
Yeah, they're entirely different things.
Mm,
And free, as I understand it, is really bought into the very economic paradigm that's producing the problem. Um, it implies, well, it implies a whole bunch, but gift is a very different thing. That's a relationship, and that's a cycle, and free just doesn't cut it. Nor does pro bono. So yeah, careful around that language when it comes to gift pricing. But in terms of like actual monetary values, I guess um, I'm thinking about a situation where you were saying when someone says, "Can I see the platform?" You're like, "Yeah." And a version of that is people say, "Wow, what's your fee?" Without having established the context for that at all. And
mm,
then how do you do that without it seeming like you're holding back on providing a number?
mm,
Well, you know what the number is. Don't just tell me what it is, kind of thing. So yeah. So but that's not so much a website question. It's more that kind of in the conversation around
mm,
pricing that comes up.
mm. How do you
Yeah.
respond to that? Like, how do you approach that? I'm curious. I don't know if they're like, like these things are so specific by case by case. But one of the questions I had about just the conversation that you outlined is where in the timeline of of a relationship that might occur. You know, someone approaches you, or you're introduced to someone, or you know, you're trying to get some, you would like to work with an organization. So you also, I mean, there's so many nuances we could go here, but the distinction between being approached by someone like an inbound lead that's interested in working with you, you're introduced or something like that, they got heard about you, or, you know, I don't know if you do this at all, but actually like approaching organizations and say, hey, I'd really like to work with you.
Yeah.
Do you do any of that?
A little bit, yeah.
A
More
lot.
so nowadays, actually. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm so I wonder if you could share a little bit about your like the approach that what that might look like
Yeah.
in reality.
Yeah, and this actually gets back to the other question too around languaging. Because I realize now, for example, I don't like the language of nonprofit discount or academic discount or student discount. Because again, that discounting notion is the old paradigm. I
Right.
avoid
Hmm.
that. And so a lot of it is framing as I think about, um, for example, just recently, um, amazing client, potential client, amazing piece of work, definitely want to do it. Um, and this fear of, well, if I charge too much, are we gonna, blow ourselves out of the water and miss that opportunity? But if I charge too little, am I underselling? All that kind of stuff.
Mm,
So what we did in that situation is had three options, but each one framed very differently. So the first framing was, um, yeah, here's the market rate. If I'm kind of giving you the short version here, but if we want to have a transactional relationship, then that's the rate. Great. But wouldn't it be nicer if we had a real partnership and a relationship? And in that case, we could actually come down off that market rate. But let's talk about it. Let's see what makes sense in terms of long-term sustainability for us as well as for you, because we want to be in this for the long haul. Um, or, we could think of this as there's a really specific piece of work to do together, kind of on a project basis. And a project basis, for some reason, I find in the work that I do, kind of hits a different line item on people's budgets.
mm.
Um, and
What's the
so if
difference
we,
between those two latter cases about, you know, like working together or project basis? Like, what, say a little
well,
more.
I think the difference is a project is still it's a deliverable in some respect, right? It's a set period of time, a set of services or visits or whatever it may be,
Mm,
um, and it's something we're going to say we're going to actually do this piece of work together over the next 9 months. So it gives you that visibility from a financial planning perspective, of course.
mm,
Say it's going to be a bigger piece of work. It requires more of a commitment on their part, particularly if the relationship's brand new. But the clarity about what we're going to do together, I think, kind of allows them to pitch it internally to people, as opposed
mm,
to option number two, which is like we're going to figure it out as we go.
mm,
Let's kind of let it evolve organically, but at a discounted rate because we're going to actually get into this with the expectation that we're going to do more work together over time, as opposed to a transactional. Here's your 5 days. Here's the cost.
mm,
So maybe it's a subtle framing, but it's not just giving them three options or saying it's about nonprofit discounts or this kind of discount. It's like, no, these are different kinds of relationships we're going to have together. And we aspire to this, but we may not be able to start there together. That's okay. Let's start where we need to. So I think that's some of the language that
mm,
I use in different ways. And then of course, you never want money to be the only reason why you don't start working together. It may be a reason, but we don't want it to be the
mm,
only reason or the main reason we don't start working together. So I think holding that kind of invitation,
mm,
because it's hard for people to talk about money. It's awkward, and some people will just avoid the conversation altogether because it's awkward. And I think one thing we can do is make it easier to talk about. And then within
mm,
that, what
mm.
flexibility they have will become apparent.
I really appreciate a couple of things there. One is the emphasis on here are the different kinds of relationships we can have rather than here is the different like stuff that you can have, right? So it's a different focus on like here's stuff that you get for money and different amounts of stuff, whatever that might be, service that you might get for money versus somehow qualifying like the different relationships that we can have and somehow like yeah framing it in those categories. I think that's to me that feels like a subtle but significant nuance. Um, remember what the second thing I had to say was? It was just is just it's there and it's maybe it'll come back to me. It
Yeah.
just evaporated out of my mind.
So I'm just as a process check-in, and you may or may not want to include this,
Mm,
but like energetically, where are you right now in this conversation? We're talking about money. We're talking about transformation. We talked about ick going in.
mm,
I'm kind of, it's a question to myself as well.
mm,
Like,
mm, mm,
as a check-in, like, is this the energetic? Is this the, um, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Because it's a little bit, there's a way to talk about this that feels like you're just completely leaning in, and it's like,
mm,
like you almost feel that the juice is the transformation. And there's a way to kind of begin to feel like, all right, we've done that, and I'm just kind of checking with myself on
mm,
that.
mm.
It's
Yeah, I think we've delved into some pretty good specific territory, and I just remembered the last point that I want to share. And and I think there's something to this is also my third interview of the day that energetically makes my brain a little more flat. But there was actually one more thing that you shared that really spoke to me, which was um, one of the things that I share with people when we're having a money conversation, and also sometimes this concern about what you shared that I don't want to price too low and don't want to, blow myself out of the water. Is I'll just share up front and say we never want money to be a reason why people don't work with us. And I use that framing all the time, and it really, for me, also helps me have the money conversation with less awkwardness, right? Because it's that going back to where we started about like having a genuine um, um, like truthfulness with yourself about why you're doing something, right? To feel good about that. I think that's so important to be clear with yourself, whether you're charging, whether you're offering a gift. There's so many ways, either way, to be a little distorted in that. Yeah, I'm going to offer this gift, but I'm really going to hope that actually they're going to give me that money, and I'll be disappointed and angry if they don't or whatever, right? So it's really good to have that internal clarity and to also find a way to be able to have a conversation about money to period in a way to be able to have a conversation about money period but also to be able to do it with like minimal awkwardness or in a way that makes that awkwardness okay and I think that's where like just being authentic, like you could even say, hey, I'm not great about talking about money, but like admit that awkwardness to get it out of the way.
yeah.
Or and I think with practice, certainly in my experience as someone who I remember, I still have this fond memory of my very first sales meeting where I was there with like my boss. This was like in 2003 or 4, and we came into the sales meeting and I froze. Like there was this awkward 30 seconds where I was supposed to talk and I didn't say anything, and my boss took over. It was hilarious. But my point is that with practice, if a person does have a challenge talking about money, I feel like it gets easier, it gets less awkward. But still, for me, the truth of the situation is that I don't want money to be a reason um, why we don't do business, especially if for whatever reason I really feel called to be in service of a situation, or I feel like something that I offer can add meaningful value. So I do just maybe want to wrap up that point there and say that um, I think it's helpful to acknowledge that and use that actually to and then that actually kind of alleviates the being blown out of the ballpark kind of thing where
Yeah. Yeah.
if you are too high, then there's this that first you kind of establish a benchmark for market value, and but then there's this territory of like I'm willing to be in service and work with you to find something that works on your budget.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that idea of naming the awkwardness. It reminds me, I have a friend whose sister, she's a really funny woman. Those moments of conversation where there's like a little bit of silence. Like if there's only a split second of silence in the conversation, she'll say, "Boy, this is awkward." It's just kind of preempted it.
But it's good
Yeah.
to name it.
Right.
One of my friends say this things is like that awkward moment between birth and death. It takes you a minute to realize what you're talking about, right? So back to your point a few moments ago, I want to like we have been talking for quite a while. Um, in this territory of the business of transformation that we have set out to bravely explore. Do you feel like there's anything else that's worth mentioning or excavating in this particular conversation?
No, nothing new. I'm just reflecting on, the business of transformation versus the transformation of business and the connection between those two, and kind of
Hmm.
explore that a little bit. And I think that's what's I think really exciting about this conversation. When when you first, invited me in, and I mentioned to my, my friend colleague Greta, and her response was ick, about, selling as a conversation. What intrigued me, first of all, just talking to you, I said, if there's any one person I want to have this conversation with, Lawrence, it's you, because you do embody this ethos. I knew we'd have a generative conversation around this. But the other part that excited me was it is the business of transformation, and so, I guess that's kind of the main one of my main takeaways as I think about this. And then one other thing I'll just add, it's kind of a non sequitur, but thinking about people who are earlier on in their career, and the tendency for people earlier on who are desperate to offer their really valuable service at a really low price. And I think that's very dangerous, because once you anchor that in the market, once you anchor that value, it's really hard to go up from there. And
Hmm.
so it's kind of a catch-22, right? If I don't offer it, I can't get the work. But I do think it's really important for people who maybe are not as secure in their abilities, or early on in some ways, to not undervalue what they're doing, and
Hmm.
to hold that line, as long as they can. Because it'll take years to move up, 30% on that price point. And if you
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
waited a bit longer and established your value, and then stuck to it, you might have saved yourself some pain. So again, a bit of a, non sequitur, but I do think it's something that, I thought about early on in my career, and in my business, which I think was really important.
Hmm. And I'll offer for anyone who's watching, you might also notice that we've got this kind of like yin yang thing going on right now. So I'll offer the counterpoint to that, which I also think is really relevant, and something that I work with a lot, which is the value of offering business for free, or just getting business with a particular client to have a reference case. If you and there, I think it's just really important to understand why you're doing something. Like, 'cause there's so many different versions of what value can look like, and sometimes if you can deliver value to the right big name client and have
Mm,
that be like a reference case, that offers you enormous value, right? And so then the question is, like, then you're just really clear on why you're doing it. And certainly as a strategy, that's where I've worked with. And I honestly, it's funny you're saying we're having this conversation right now, because um this is something I think about all the time with Sutra. Like, I in many ways, I would rather somebody use our product than not use our product, even if it's for free. Because I know that when someone's using our product, they're onboarding other people into the experience, and they're creating a group learning experience. And that for us is like meaningful exposure. So there's lots of dimensions to that, because sometimes if someone needs a lot of support or whatever, there's an expense around that. But certainly one of the techniques that I work with a lot in terms of like expanding a business is the power of free, as is the power of free, as far as like me offering something for free can, with the right kind of understanding, actually offer enormous value to me.
mm,
And so that's an interesting counterpoint to what you're saying, because I totally agree with what you're saying. I just think it's important to understand like the many nuances in why you're doing something, the value that you're getting, and whether or not maybe you are putting yourself in a position where then you're stuck at a certain level, for whatever reason, and then it becomes a whole thing to get out of that space.
yeah, yeah.
So many nuances. Now, I wanted to add one more thing, and maybe we can wrap this up after that, which was about integrity. I think that's one of the territories that I feel there can be an ick around, which is either around persuasion marketing, or trying to like uh, convince people, or somehow not being clear about why you're doing something. And I think this is where we talked about like the business of transformation, the transformation of business, and in the middle of that is like the transformation of ourselves as the vehicle for whatever we're offering. And I just feel like it's so important to, in the process of doing business, in the process of engaging with the economy and with other people, to just be very clear on your own integrity, on who you are in that process, on why you're doing something, on what you're committed to, and your values. Because it's really easy, and I see this every once in a while in people who kind of they talk about one thing and then they operate in a different way. And I just feel like if you're going to be in the world of transformation and delivering transformation, then there's like almost like an even higher standard on you to live what you preach, to live what you're putting out into the world. And that requires like a certain just a deep level of introspection as far as like where your integrity is, what you're really committed to, and the extent to which you're willing to make the difficult choices to really live what you're inviting other people into.
Yeah, that's well said, Lorenz. And if I would offer my yin to that yang in our podcast
I love
here,
this.
uh, it could be a nice format for future conversations, but it would be sometimes because of the circumstances of our lives, our business, our finances, the kind of as it were, the kind of the unresolved matters of the mind and the heart. We can't actually live in our integrity
Hmm.
without significant consequence, you know. Um, and so there is also something I think really important and beautiful about noticing those moments for myself and saying, yeah, right now I want to make a different choice. I want to live a different way. I want to offer gift pricing. I want to whatever it might be, right? And I'm not going to do it. I can't do it.
Hmm.
Um, and in not just coming to terms, but accepting that we actually ready ourselves to be able to make that choice when the moment does arise where we can make a choice. Um, Conversely, if we kind of hold a too high of a bar around integrity, and not accept that we often all serve two different masters, be it ego or financial or greediness or whatever it may be, and also these more aspirational qualities of ourselves. If we ignore that choice, we become blind to the moments where we can make a different choice. So I think those moments of like, real conflict between who I am and who I want to be or values are in a way their own form of gift to help us get ready to more fully live, on the side of the equation that we really want to. Um, yeah. And this is a kind of partly my answer to my own question earlier on about what do you do with people who can pay and don't. It's like, okay, well, that's
Hmm.
a choice. And I want you
Hmm.
to see that choice, right? And not judge you for it, but just notice what that means for you in this moment. And there's something about coming into relationship around that, I think is really valuable. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, that's the
And
yin to the yang or the yang to the yin. I'm not sure.
I think it's really humanizing. I really appreciate that element. It's really humanizing because we are, and I've come to really honestly appreciate and realize that about some spiritual figures, like people doing transformation work in the world that I really kind of put on a pedestal, but then I was, maybe judged about some ways that they operate. And I just had this moment of like humility, just recognizing that, this person, they're just human. I'm the one who constructed their pedestal. Like they're just human and they're doing their best to function in a world that is the way it is and to offer their gift, whatever they have into the world the best way that they can. And I just like it's important to be connected to that. One thing that that I try to live up to is that I try to live up to that, in the future, if I'm super successful and I'm telling my story, um, that I don't do anything that I wouldn't feel comfortable publicly sharing.
Mm,
And so I really when I have this question of like, is this questionable or something like that? One of my litmus tests is, would I be comfortable talking about this publicly? Would I be comfortable? Is there any part of what I'm doing here where I wouldn't want people to know that I was doing?
right.
And that's I'd say that covers a big part of integrity for me, like as in the way that I mean it. So and I really, I think I do a pretty good job of living by that. That I don't want to do things that I'm not willing to talk about publicly as far as how I run a business. And that's also that's often can be an option. Like there's so many things that you can do. Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. My own version of that is what would my kids make of this in 50 years?
Yeah. And it's just part of, I think we're all doing the best that we can, especially people in this field of transformation. And I have so much respect for what it takes to try to invite a new way of being in this world, and so yeah, that's really the heart of the work that we do and that you do, which is supporting people in a transition that is so called for on this planet. So I have so much respect for anybody who's in it, who's like, you know, living it because it's demanding.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing that we all get to do this work at this point, this business of, or the business of transformation, as it were, at a point in history where it's really hard to do it. But there's a
Mm,
there's a there's a bridge, we're kind of there's a bridge, there's a kind of a transition between stories that's happening right now that we happen to be a part of. And I like to
right.
believe there's a time in history where doing the business of transformation actually was the business that we all do, and therefore it's accepted and it's remunerated in whatever way it needs to be. But we're at this really difficult moment. So what a in its own way, what a gift to be here to help bridge that gap. And
Mm,
I think fairly soon, I think more and more. You mentioned Burning Man, but there's gonna be more. There's so many examples now, people operating in a different business model for transformation, and I think we're
mm,
actually not that far away from being able to do this work and actually live a full, happy life while doing it. Because the most important work that needs to be done in this world that's not actually paid for.
mm. Amen. That's true. That's true. And I'll add to that, the other side of that is also that to be alive at a time when it's possible to do this work.
Mm.
Imagine trying to do this work in the 1800s or something like that. That you can actually have this like business of transformation, um, as something that so many people are trying to do on the world. As much as we might hold some judgment about the condition of the world right now, one of the conditions is that there is this openness to transformation, to awareness-based approaches, to mindfulness, and the many different expressions of that in the world in a way that we have never seen before. Um, and I think that's part of being in this bridge right now. It's a very uncomfortable process of we're building the bricks of a bridge, all everyone who's doing this work, and that it's demanding work, but it's possible right now, and it's yeah, it's amazing to be alive to be part of it.
It really is. Yeah, it's kind of a new and ancient endeavor in that respect, I think.
Mm,
It's completely
mm,
new. And yeah, it's been done before in different ways, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's fun. It's but great. I really appreciate the question, Lorenz. As I said, getting into I didn't know I'd never talked about this really. And so I'm really just delighted to see where, this is kind of emerging. It's going to inform how I take my next decision actually as I get back into the work of business of transformation. So
mm.
thank you for the gift of your time.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I really appreciate it. I also, I don't think I've ever gone in this depth or had a conversation quite like this. So I appreciate that we had this conversation, that it's recorded, and also just to be honest, I'm really deeply touched with everything that you shared about how you've worked with the your approach to gift and offering your work in that way. And there's a lot for me to kind of reflect on more deeply, particularly around the internal orientation to really being open to just giving a gift without expectation.
Yeah, yeah. Remind me next time we talk. I probably should have shared it on this call, but I don't know if I've told you the story of this guy Vimal Kumar that I've worked with in India,
Mm.
and my experience of the gift uh, in a workshop that he offered in India. If you have a few minutes, I can tell it to you, but it's
Well,
it's
it's still
really
recording, so if you want to share it as part of the recording, we can do that, or we can wrap it up.
well. I mean, I'll just tell you, 'cause for me, it really does
Sure,
capture the essence of this.
go for it.
This was a leadership workshop in Kurukshetra, India, very historic town, and Vimal, who's leading a movement for the scavenger community in India. So these are people that have been called untouchables and Dalits and all these different names, often pejoratively. And so people who, in many cases, had come 40 to 70 hours by train to get to this place in Kurukshetra, and did so with no money. So they had to live on the largesse of other people who would pay for their train or their hotel on this trip over. And anyway, at the very end of this 5-day workshop, Vimal said to them, and this was in Hindi, but it was translated for me. He said, "I know many of you, didn't know how you were going to get here and don't know how you're going to get back. So if you need money to get back, let us know. We'll find some way to, he has no, nothing to give back, but somehow that was the offer." And he said, but others have offered to pay for the hotel for these 5 days. And it was a small amount. It was like $3 per person for the week, but a lot of money for people who have no money. And so what happened next, Lorenz, which is amazing, is people came up and literally, with one hand would give money for the workshop gift, and then with another hand take money, sometimes more money than they gave. And the kind of Western rational part of my brain was saying, well, you just net those things out. It's a more efficient transaction. What became so apparent to me was this was the spirit of the gift, that
Mm,
these are very different actions, and the giving and the
mm,
receiving was the strength of this movement, of them
mm,
taking care of each other. Again, my food is in my brother's belly. So a necessary way to operate when you're leading a movement with no resources, no financial resources. But what a beautiful way to come together as a community. And so that's why I offer that story, because
mm,
it is so doable, right? If we open ourselves up to it.
mm. Beautiful. Eric, thank you so much. I'm just grateful for our conversation, grateful for our relationship, and looking forward to our next recorded conversation, which I'm sure will happen.
Thanks again, and let's keep talking for sure.
Yeah, much love.